that I didn't look at you just now when I said that. It might have seemed like I looked in your direction.
This is just lemonade. I swear to God.
I'm looking right at him, he's such a jerk. But his defense, if you can call it that, was, well, I black out a lot. And I was blacked out that night. He says, I really don't think I would do that. You know, it doesn't seem like something I would do. But if Laverne's saying that happened, why would she say that? I mean, that was his defense, pretty much. So he was toast. After she got convicted of aggravated murder, he pled guilty to avoid a death sentence. So the two of them were in prison for 5 years until along comes the happy-faced killer and says, oh, sorry about those two, but it was me. So I figured if I couldn't turn that story into a good first novel, then I had no business even trying to write anything. But so that became Judgment Calls.
And that was the birth of Samantha Kincaid, who also was her protagonist for Missing Justice and Closed Case. But you were actually writing those after you left Portland, right?
Yeah, for me, I had moved to New York. It's a very long story that involves a boy who's no longer in my life. But because of a boy, I moved to New York and left Portland, which I had not been happy about, leaving Portland. And I left a job I really loved. And so when I would write, when I would work on my manuscript, it was like visiting home almost for me. I was writing about the office I had left. It was very much written with love for that job and that office and the experiences I had as a prosecutor. And you made fun of Tom earlier for having a character who was a boxer and a drug counselor, just like Tom. But so my first protagonist, Samantha Kincaid, was a prosecutor in Portland, very much modeled after the life I had there.
But you fell in love with New York.
Yes, eventually.
She fell in love with New York
and a new
eventually.
boy.
And a new boy. And then along came Ellie Hatcher. And Ellie Hatcher's a little different from Samantha. Why don't you talk about her?
Yeah, I feel so. The book that comes out in March, 212, will be my third book in the Ellie Hatcher series. Thank you for the plug there. And when I turned to Ellie Hatcher, it was not with the intention of creating a second series character. I know you've heard from some writers today who are very good about planning their writing careers. I'm not like that. I write the book I want to write at the moment, and I had an idea for a novel based on internet dating because I had met the new boy, now my husband. I had met him on Match.com, and even though it turned out well for me, the entire time I was, I think I was enrolled in Match.com for all of 3 months or something, but for those 3 months, I realized how potentially dangerous internet dating is because necessarily, right, you go on there with the hope of finding someone great, right? So you have to be optimistic, otherwise there's no point in doing it. You've got to have your eyes open thinking this is going to be the one, this is going to be a great thing. And then meanwhile, there's no accountability, right? If you think about traditional dating, it's someone you met at work, or it's a neighbor, or it's a friend of a friend. So like if they turn out to be a total creep, you're going to tell everyone at work, you're going to tell everyone else in the building, and you're going to tell your mutual friend. But there's no accountability in internet dating. It's completely anonymous. People can make up whatever BS they want to make up. And I thought, if I can't make a good book out of that, I got no business doing this. So I wanted to kind of tap into the scariness of anonymity combined with that cautious optimism. And write a thriller based on that. But the problem is, at that point, I had only written books involving Portland, Oregon, with my Samantha Kincaid character. And the problem is probably like Milwaukee. In Portland, Oregon, if you met somebody on Match.com and went out to dinner for the first date, 10 minutes in, you would figure out that like, oh, he works with my cousin, or that we only live 5 blocks from each other. And Portland's very small circles, and I think that I had tapped into that really well in the 3 Samantha Kincaid books, kind of taken advantage of the fact that everybody knows everybody in Portland. But because I had highlighted the fact that everybody knows everybody in Portland, then the anonymity of the internet wasn't going to be scary. And by that time, I had been living in New York for a few years, and I was ready to write about New York, and New York was the perfect place to take advantage of anonymity and how you can be surrounded by people but know no one and be very much alone. And so I wrote Dead Connection based on that. And I just thought it was going to be a standalone, but I found myself, without giving anything away, the way I ended the book, I kind of knew there was more to come from Ellie Hatcher. So Samantha got 3 books all to herself, and then I wrote 3 books about Ellie Hatcher. So the 3rd one comes out in March.
And Ellie is not a prosecutor.
No, I'm sorry, I'm not very good at explaining stuff. So, yeah, so Ellie Hatcher is a detective with the NYPD, and that was another thing I wanted to shift gears with. If I was going to be doing something new, I may as well make it really new. I had found after writing the Samantha Kincaid books that one limitation is in terms of the choice to make Samantha a prosecutor is that she necessarily is always a little bit removed from the action, right? Realistically, she's not the one who's going to be kicking in doors and interviewing the witnesses. She's doing it with the police officers, so it's not as direct with her. The relationship of the story to her is one step removed. And so I decided to do a police procedural instead. And then I think it's challenged me more as a writer because Samantha was very much my voice, sort of a thinner, faster running me, living a more perfect life than I ever had probably in the Samantha Kincaid books. But when I started something new and created Ellie Hatcher, I didn't want to do what some writers do. You know, some writers announce that they're going to start another series, but it's like the same exact character that they always write about, but like the hair color is different. So I didn't want Ellie to just be a blonde Samantha Kincaid, so I had to make her different and not just in superficial ways. And it really forced me, one, to kind of focus on what made Samantha Samantha and try to turn that upside down with Ellie, and then also to tap into something that wasn't so superficially me, like to try to find other parts of my experiences and my voice that I could draw on. So it's been kind of fun to create this person that's very, very different from me.
Well, you blogged recently about how you hear the voice of authors now that you know them personally, and that you see things in a book that you wouldn't have otherwise seen. And I think I see a lot of you in Ellie. But you also have some experience with police work that people often overlook, that they think that you weren't connected to that at all.
Oh, yeah, I had a great job at the district attorney's office in Portland because I got to work on some pretty big cases that I mentioned. I also got to try little tiny cases like where nothing is at stake, but I shouldn't say nothing, to somebody it matters, I suppose, but not the kind of cases you cry over, but you learn how to try cases, right? You get to try different things, and if it doesn't go well, the world's not going to break. But we had a community policing unit, and with prosecutors especially associated with that, and I was a police community prosecutorial liaisons with that picture, where I actually worked out of a precinct for 2 years. And I could take cases if I wanted them, but otherwise they would go downtown to the trial units. And my job really was to be a legal advisor to the police. And so I would go on midnight ride-alongs, and I had my own little Kevlar vest when I wanted to seem badass. So yeah, it was a great job, and I learned much more there than I ever learned downtown about how things really work. Sort of the way the case looks on paper by the time the DAs get it is very different than the way it actually happens sometimes. I learned much more about not just the law of policing out there, but the culture of policing. And I think there's no way I could write the Ellie Hatcher series if I hadn't had that experience.